I just really enjoy that. I think there's a lot of meaty musical meat. I just said meat a lot.
Hello and welcome to a special supplementary episode of the Pressed Up podcast. I'm shouting into the microphone at what is a pretty early recording time for us, Brody. So I apologize for
it's not a gentlemanly
intro.
hour, is how I describe it.
This is a bit of a special episode because later, just in a moment, as of you listening to this, it was just a moment ago for Brody and I, we're going to be joined by a couple of the minds from the upcoming Xbox exclusive title South of Midnight, being developed by Compulsion Games, who, Brody, you'd remember from Contrast and We Happy Few, two games that you thoroughly enjoyed. You're obviously kind of in the process of reviewing South of Midnight as well at the moment.
Yep.
We're joined by both Jasmin Roy, who serves as the game's director, and Chris Fox, who heads up all things audio at South of Midnight. So really interesting to chat to the two of them and kind of see what I guess within their respective fields, what they're able to do with this game. What kind of stood out to you in the conversation, do you think, Brody?
I think the thing that stood out first and foremost is that they're just both really passionate and excited to get this game in players' hands. And obviously, while I can't touch on whether people should be excited about that or not at this point in time, I think that was just refreshing. And I guess hearing them talk about how the game was conceived and I guess how creatively liberating Xbox is as a parent sort of owner of them, I suppose, technically.
Yeah.
It's always nice to hear. So, yeah, look, it was just great to hear them sort of go through how the game got going and what inspired it all.
Yeah, I'm super stoked we get to do that. I think it's always interesting hearing directly from devs who have spent years of their life kind of working on this game. And I'm really pleased that we get to kind of bring that to you on the podcast and hear that conversation more or less in full. Without further ado, let's get to the interview with Jasmin and Chris from Compulsion Games. So we're incredibly lucky to be joined today by both Chris and Jasmin from Compulsion Games. Brody actually here informs me that he beat the game last night, so I'll be letting him ask the bulk of the questions. But Jasmin, first let me ask you, we're about a week away from the game's launch at this point in time. It's obviously now in reviewers' hands. That's what Brody is doing for our side. What thoughts and emotions are going through your head after so many years of development?
Well, it's super exciting. It really is. We've put really everything we had in there, and we really can't wait. Like, this is still, before the game is released, so we really can't wait to go on, streaming and looking at players play live and seeing, the live reaction to the scenes that we built, because the number of people that we've seen, play the game so far has been mostly, on the playtest side of things. We haven't had live reaction from people, so we're really, really, really excited about that. That's pretty much that so far. Excitement, I'd say, is mostly it, and it did, this weekend. We've still been, kind of fine-tuning things and making sure everything is ready for launch. So for us, it's still a little bit unreal that it's happening so fast, right? It's we only just finished it, and then people are gonna play it. So yeah, it's gonna be cool. It's gonna be really cool. Chris, how do you feel about it? How do you feel?
I'm excited for people to get to play it and experience it, and after you put kind of 5 years into something, you want to just excited to let people experience it, and you have a finished product, a finished game. So I don't know. I feel like it's fun to get it out there in the wild and let people experience what you've made.
So you say it's been 5 years in the making for you guys. That obviously meant you probably started right at the start of this pandemic. How did that play into things as far as developing this goes?
Well, for me, it was it's pretty bad. I guess, certainly, trying to get used to. I mean, it was like everyone, right? Trying to get used to working, and then I definitely feel to some degree, the creative leadership, say Jasmin and I get on really well. When we're in a room together, riffing and stuff, it's often easier to have that creative flow and brainstorm when you're in person. Whereas, like later on when you're just working through the Jiras and stuff, I think it's a bit easier. It doesn't necessarily have to be all together, but that initial creative like spark sometimes is nice. And we were lucky to have that first. And then later on, kind of as it was going into like off the prototype, I think that's kind of when it happened with the pandemic. But I'm not sure, Jasmin, like what you think
Oh,
about that.
well, just as a precision, I joined like 3 years ago, so I did skip most of the pandemic side of this project, but I was working on other project at other companies during the pandemic. So much like Chris, it's the contact isn't really the same. But at this point, I'd say the studio it's still fully remote in the sense that we've got people, working on that worked on South of Midnight all across different time zones, all across different cities. So we still have a good infrastructure for remote work in general. So all of our meetings are usually taken online. But yeah, it's been cool to come back to the office and kind of play it live in some of our meeting rooms. That was really fun, and getting some of the exchange, especially with Chris in the audio room. That's the type of things
Yeah,
that you
it's nice,
can't
right?
really do remote, and we
Yeah,
got this audio studio, so we, going back in there and playing the game on like a big setup does feel very different than when you're only playing it on PC, only playing it on remote, only playing it, even through, some of the software that we use for remote work, where you don't get the full-fledged, HD render of the game. So yeah, but it's been something that we did adapt and we
yeah.
carried on. So every learning we did over the pandemic, we carried on into the rest of the production. So it still felt mostly remote for a while.
So I've always viewed Compulsion as this sort of scrappy upstart sort of studio, from pinch hitting on other games to fund, contrast, and crowdfunding We Happy Few. Is that how you viewed yourselves internally, as this sort of little studio that could?
Yeah, that was still the same mentality for South of Midnight. It did grow from 30 up to a bit under 100, I'd say. I'll have to find the actual numbers, but we still kept the same ideas of we're going to do the game that we want to do. Like, what's the idea that we want to do? Okay, we want to explore this. Let's look at how we can make that work and how we can build a game around these core ideas. That was like, our creative director, David Sears, grew up in the South, came up, talked to the team about his childhood there. I was like, I really want to do something with that folklore and, something that he found inspiring, and then we were inspired by it. So it was always like, what is the kind of like, how would it be a compulsion game? It's whimsical. It has this striking art style. It has everything in there that we wanted to really push forward. So the same mentality from Contrast and We Happy Few still stayed at the studio for South of Midnight. I would say it's the financing is different. The reality of just finding the money and everything is different, but the core of what we were doing was very much the same. Would you agree with that, Chris? Would you deny
I
it?
think so.
Go
No,
ahead.
I think the difference is like Jasmine says, like we've improved our processes, and we've kind of the production side of the thing is what's changed, but not in a way that would make it cookie cutter. So like I think we've retained our identity, but we just are able to do things better. I guess hopefully that's what you want to do, always improve. But yeah, no, we had like to be honest, like having people like Jasmine come on board with the his experience and a lot of the other people that came on board as we ramped up really did put us in a good position to succeed. So thanks, Jasmine.
Oh, well, thank you too, Chris. But yeah, it was really a matter of keeping the soul of
Yeah.
the Compulsion Games to really you know bring it to market really.
So it sounds like while I guess having the Xbox or Microsoft side of things, like the money side, made things a bit easier. I presume it didn't, as you say, it didn't change your philosophy at all. That it was maybe a game that would be coming to Game Pass or anything like that. Like that was all out of mind.
Well, the thing is that, especially with Xbox, the way it works is they really basically say, you guys do you, and that's true of our studio, and you can see it through all of the other studios that they work with. So that was really basically, we go and we do like they are interested in the type of game that is being done, so they just go and let you kind of do your own thing. As far as consideration that it would go to Game Pass or not, it was for us. The start point was we want to do a third-person action adventure, narrative-driven third-person action adventure. That's going to be about, I think the original thing was 8 to 10 hours. It's more like 10 to 12 at this point. But it was always going to be that very concise narrative that we wanted to do. That was the game that we were interested in doing, and that's the one that you got to play, recently. So I can't say that there was necessarily any specific concerns that I could pinpoint, or any specific consideration that I could pinpoint aside from the original idea was this, and it seems like the stars align for everybody to kind of just go, yeah, okay, you guys go and do it. And Xbox been pretty excited with everything that's been going on. So yeah, it all worked out.
I'm curious because the fact that it's a concise kind of narrative is frankly music to Brody and I's ears, particularly Brody with a couple of young kids in the house. It's finding time
Me
for big
too.
stories is is made more and more difficult. I'm curious as to what led you to that decision. Was that a matter of scope, or did you feel like the kind of best way to kind of tell the story was going to be 10 to 12 hours?
I'd say there was like in the early versions, of, oh, what do we do? What kind of scope do we do? There was a bit of back and forth about which length it would be. But when the narrative became about Hazel going on this quest to find a mother that had disappeared during the hurricane, it's the kind of narrative that push on a momentum, that kind of like you go like, hey, there's an urgency, how do we keep that urgency going? And that kind of lended itself well to that shorter kind of adventure, because we didn't want to just to stretch it. We were like, okay, this is the beats that we're interested in. We think it's going to fit in about this time frame and this playtime. And yeah, we almost hit right on the mark of how much we evaluated it. But yeah, if you go and you say we're gonna make it about finding your mother that has disappeared, usually you're gonna be going on that chase and that momentum and that flow. That's gonna probably be on the shorter side rather than being something that might be necessarily 200 hours, for example. Not to say that we couldn't have made the game 200 hours and just stretch that out, but the way we were writing that narrative was kind of telling of giving us kind of a roadmap that we were like, yeah, that we feel the pacing is going to be great if we do it that way. And yeah, there's always the consideration of scope. We're at the biggest team and everything. So, but both of those things kind of, align. It was an organic process. Should have been my short and clear and concise answer.
So, with South of Midnight's conception, you said that it came from more of a narrative idea rather than a gameplay one. Is that generally how you approach things? Narrative first?
That one has been an organic process in terms of what it was, but it came from the creative ideas of David, his idea at the beginning of doing kind of a modern folktale inspired by the South. So I do think in this case, narrative is kind of the embryo of everything, because you can't really do a modern folktale without the folktale, so you need the tale in there, right? And in terms of where the game landed, really did went with, we want to tell that story, we want it to look this way, okay, and how does that translate into Azel's powers? How does it translate this magic, see the magical element of the setting? We want players to interact with them. How does that translate to gameplay? So it really came from like kind of like this narrative core, and then we translated it into the gameplay that permeates the journey, really. So I would say that in this case it is very much the idea of the modern folktale that is at the core and the topmost aspect of the project.
Cool. What was it like to obviously coming, say, from a dystopian '60s Wellington Wells? Was it very creatively fertile for you guys to deal with something so underrepresented like the Deep South?
I mean, for me, it was another interesting subject matter, right? Because like with I worked on We Happy Few as well, and that was something. The story was like kind of meaty to get into, and there was also a lot of tongue in cheek. So that was a real difference for me. It was like another interesting subject matter, but this time maybe a little bit less jokey. And a bit, like leaning into like slightly more serious, but like it's still got its comedy in there, it's dark comedy and stuff, but it's like it's not quite the same, right? Um, so that, yeah, I think it was good to get your teeth into, and I was excited about the challenge. Like David came to me with a couple of interesting challenges, like action equals musicality was one of them. He said, and I wanted like he said to our composer, I don't want music, which we had to kind of decipher into being that he didn't want a traditional score, but he wanted something that was a bit more, melodic, memorable melodies that he could hum along in the shower, you know. But yeah, it was a good challenge, and really happy with what came out of it.
Beautiful. So, given history, this setting could be seen as one that, if handled incorrectly, could invite a bit of controversy. We sort of saw it with Princess and the Frog from Disney. Did it feel important for you guys to first and foremost do right by the culture that this game is rooted in?
You want me to go? So yeah, we did definitely talk to the experts. Obviously, really important. And obviously, from me, I'm even further. Like people often like say, "Oh, there's a Canadian dev studio." I'm like actually from England, so I'm even further away. So we had to make sure we lent on, the experts and people like Donald Washington who came down and they told us Southern stories. Actually, gave us this great almost like we were sitting around a fire pit or something, and told us these folk tales. And I think just from there you got real spellbound by what could be done orally. So I think from there on we kind of lent into that, making sure that we spoke to the right people, getting the experts involved, and working with performers. So I work with performers from down in Nashville. The Voice of Magic's kids choir from a local Nashville gospel church, for instance, and so with the narrative team also had their own experts, and we just the performers again had family down there or were from down there, so I had a lot of input, and so we just made sure we were malleable to make sure we used the did things the right way, let's say.
Yeah, and that was like in terms of concern, it was always the constant concern, being like, oh, is this going to be accurate? How is this, going to be perceived or not? Which is why we really worked, day in day out with consultant experts, and some people on our team did grow up in the South, do come from there. So there's a lot of little modification, big and small, that we did that were like, oh no, this is not the right, like this is not the right thing. Whether it was a story beat or an element of a background of a character, up down to certain type of grass and fences that are not used in these specific cases. So there was like a lot of little, like it was the most the constant revision that we did over and over, just to make sure that people would look at it and be like, especially that people who live there, that they go, oh yeah, I recognize this. You know what I mean? There was still an appeal from the team to just the idea of the modern folk. There was an appeal on for the team to work on that. Like we were all like, oh, this is going to be cool to do kind of a modern fantasy game. So I think that was like the core idea. But then it did it did push us to kind of look at every nook and crannies to try to make sure to give it justice. It is still a fantasy universe that we built on our own.
Yeah.
It's not. It's kind of our version of some of the elements of mythology. We're inspired by it. There's no definitive version of all of these legends that we're inspiring ourselves from. It's mostly oral tradition that they mostly exist as oral traditions. So we do inspire ourselves from it, but we wanted to make sure that people would be able to kind of see them and be like, oh yeah, that's like, I get the vibe. They get the vibe, and they get also the details and everything. So yeah, lots of attention to detail there.
Yeah, so you mentioned obviously a lot of this stuff is handed down orally and it's all through word of mouth stories. Outside of the experts you leaned on, was there any kind of required reading for the team? Like, was there one other particular part of like medium that you could lean to? Like, is there a book that you could read? Say I was interested in this. Could I go to Amazon and pick up a book?
Which you are, right? Like, you tried kind of digging deeper into the
but
history
you can't
when
find
the game was
anything, man.
announced.
There's nothing there.
Do you have the list?
Yeah,
We could
well,
provide the list.
I can tell you some movie references, but there are books, right? So for me, because I work in audio, right? So I don't ever read anything. But like audiobooks, great. But also like so I can tell you, like, we were based around like Southern Gothic kind of movies, working with like shadow and light. Stuff like Night of the Hunter, for instance, the kind of melodramatic poses. These were all inspirations early on that David, Whitney, and the rest of the team were like kind of had required watching. And there was a bunch of books, of course, like, I want to say Faulkner. I'm not sure, but that's a kind of a what's popping into my head. Could be completely made up, but not the author, just the reference. There was also things like Beast of the Southern Wilds as a movie to watch, and yeah, it was just that kind of vibe. So we had a bunch of things like that we were referring to when we started out. But I don't know about games. I'm not sure if we had any particular games. I remember like Tomb Raider had been mentioned just because of the linear kind of aspect of it. But I'm not sure if there's any other games. But we did a bunch of research essentially at the very beginning, didn't we, Jasmin?
Yeah. It was mostly about Southern Gothic, both the literary genre and some of the movies that inspired it. But yeah, we need to find you the specific list of all the readings. But in terms of the actual legendarium and where you can find it, it is mostly a oral tradition, mostly from Wikipedia and other storytellers from the area that we got most of the stories from.
Yeah, of Mice and Men. There you go. There's one.
Of Mice and Men, lovely.
Yeah.
Just reverting back to the obviously the songs that you guys have put together for this game, obviously being driven by lyrics and stuff like that. Was that intended sort of in-world, in-game to be your own form of oral tradition and handing down like those stories to the player?
Yeah, like folk songs, right? So that's kind of one of the interesting. We're talking about like folk tales and in a narrative way, but we were like, okay, how do we do something novel that could be, like iconic to South of Midnight in music? And I went back to what David said, like he doesn't want music, right? So okay, so what does that mean? Well, maybe hummable melodies mean songs, and then kind of follow. We did this interesting kind of thing which was like make concept songs, like the artists make concept art. So they do 2D drawings that give the 3D artists a starting place to make 3D models or do the levels or even the creatures, right? So we did songs. So we had the lore of the creature. We worked with the narrative team with David Sears to get some lyrics. The composer then kind of got inspired by those lyrics, made the song, produced the song. And again, I'll say thank you to Microsoft for having the budget to do this. And then with that song, we weren't really sure if we were even going to be able to use that in the game or how to use it, right? So over the course of the production as the game makes itself, it was suggested in one of our brainstorms, like I think Olivier came up with it, that how about we have these magical kids, the gospel choir that I mentioned earlier, be actually recount in song, in verse, the traumatic memory that you witness, and that became in-game lyrical approach. So you basically get all of the song throughout the level, and then get a big old rendition of it at the end sometimes. Not every time, but sometimes.
Being that the narrative and the story can be told throughout these songs, was there any concern with releasing the game soundtrack a week early and perhaps spoiling the story if people really paid attention?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you play it in the game, it's always going to have its own feeling. So, part of the kids being the voice of magic and experiencing that, going through like that, is always going to be the best way to experience the songs. But it's not linear media, right? So when you listen to it, you're going to have a very linear approach. But in our game, the interactive music will give you like the intended experience, let's say.
Cool. So the porcelain white faces in We Happy Few is a visual that I'll never forget. Like, I think Compulsion has always had really great chops at constructing a distinctive visual identity for all of its games, and South of Midnight is no different. The game's almost like a living storybook, obviously. So what informed a lot of that look?
Go ahead, Jasmin. You've got it.
Do I go? Yeah, it's because Whitney, our director, isn't here now. But no, what informed it at the beginning was really the idea of the handcrafted approach. They wanted everything to feel like they were either handcrafted dolls or figurines, and even the little diorama, making it look like every part of the environment would feel like it's been manipulated by someone, and that informed both the visual style and also the animation style, because they wanted to go for something that would be a little bit more like stop motion. And both of these things combined with the storybook really gave it that feel of almost kind of nostalgia for these kind of old school animation techniques and also modeling techniques. Of course, it's all done through modern a modern approach through a video game, but it's the idea of taking these philosophies and then putting them back into the game. So you saw, I think we released it, the stop motion video we did with Clyde and Ree, which was they basically did a whole little set. They built all of the characters so that they could be hand animated, and that informed both some of the looks and also some of the animation that we were going to use. But that idea of making everything handcrafted for South of Midnight was really at the core of the original identity for making it feel like it is a storybook come to life.
Cool. The game's obviously quite different from the other games that you've made. I find it interesting that the core tenets being the combat and the traversal are kept relatively separate throughout, with each battle being arena focused. Was this a deliberate attempt to let the world and the story breathe on its own?
Yeah, so the pacing of each level has really been crafted through its narrative delivery, and you're going to see as you play the game that it is quite dense. It's in its narration. There's always something new happening. There's always a new hook or a story development moving forward. So when we worked on the first few drafts of each of the regions that you go through, we ended up with this very deliberate pacing of going through traversal, exploration, letting the world breathe, and then back into these combat arenas where the Aints are mostly haunting the place. The idea of the Aints being a creature that haunts. My pronunciation haunts. Yeah, my pronunciation of this one is going to be butchered. But the idea that they are kind of geolocalized in a sense, they are tied to a specific place, something terrible happened to that place, was that the idea of these evil spirit kind of roaming around. So we wanted to focus them at in the different arenas. So you're going to see as you play, there's a lot of story development that leads into swatting vistas, beautiful landscape, lots of exploration, and then these combat arenas that kind of spike the experience, kind of to give it this high octane action feeling once in a while. So all of the pacing was really deliberate in terms of creating variety, but also creating a momentum, both in the narrative, the action, and the story. So, yeah.
Chris, this one might be best directed at you, but are there any things out of the back catalogue of games you've developed, being Contrast or We Happy Few, that may be informed, like something you've learned from those games that informed how you approach this game?
That having songs in a game is really cool. I feel like we're all used to having the game score, right? So it's something that goes on in the background, doesn't really offend or attract too much attention to it. It just helps you along. So I think that the interesting thing that we did in We Happy Few was the band, the Make Believes. So like if you play that game throughout, you get these different songs, and we actually work with some great musicians from Montreal for that, like Patrick Watson, the Bar Brothers, and Murray Lightburn from the Deers. So that was a really nice experience for me. In this case, we thought maybe that's one of our little calling cards. Let's carry that on, but maybe make it a little bit bigger. So that's where the songs came in, instead of having kind of a make-believe band that was more like diegetic in the world and came up every once in a while but wasn't really part of the story. In this case, we're like really leaning into these songs and making them a bigger part of the experience. So I'd say that's probably the biggest learning, and I would just really enjoy that. I think there's a lot of meaty musical meat. I just said meat a lot.
A lot of meaty meat.
Meaty meat, yeah.
Yeah. So Xbox has gone on record lately saying that on the back of learnings from both Halo and Fallout, they'd like to explore more TV and film. Having played this game but not wanting to say too much, I can definitely see some potential for expansion of this world and of its universe. Would you see yourself maybe taking the Grand Tapestry to television if pressed?
Well, we have nothing to announce at the time, and we're really focusing on shipping the game. So yeah, there's nothing else to announce regarding future plans for Sun Midnight. Yeah.
Lovely. All right.
Oh, I'm conscious about time, because I think we might need to get the two of you sort of back on track with your schedule. But if I've got time to sneak sort of one more in before we go, going right back to where we kind of kicked off, you talked about like starting off with a third-person action adventure. It sort of really feels like this is the kind of bow and the string in the string and the bow that Xbox has kind of been looking for at this sort of point in time. As we sort of close out, I guess, what sort of pitch would you be making to players if like me, kind of a story-driven game is kind of very much what appeals to them?
Oh, you mean go ahead, Chris.
Well, it's like these types of games from our studio, like story-driven games. That's what we love making, right? We love crafting new worlds, not revisiting worlds. We love making story-driven games that make you feel something. So that's why I'm here at this company, this studio, working with these great other people, is because it's always interesting. I always get to make something new in a new world. So I hope that other people also really enjoy those types of games, and we'll keep making them, right, Jasmin?
Well, definitely, you said it. You. I think it's well put. I think it's well put.
You phrased it much more eloquently than I put the question, so well done to you there, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining the two of us. We're both very excited for the game. Well, I guess Brody having beat it now, but I've not had the chance to dive in myself yet. So very, very keen, and thank you for joining the show and taking us through it.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
You.
Lovely to chat.